Does it feel good to be in front of the camera?
Never.
Never? But you did act. I mean, you did try it out. I mean, is that something that you will never do again because it wasn't the right thing to do?
I enjoyed it. I should use my microphone.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I did a little acting in, high school and college, and that was pretty much it. But yeah, and I did commercials when I was a kid, 3 commercials.
Which ones?
McDonald's.
That's a good example
Right?
for kids nowadays.
Exactly.
Okay, but being raised in Los Angeles, I mean, was it a given that you would end up in the movie industry, especially with the stuff that you did as a kid, being in commercials, or was it something that you sort of had to be pushed into?
There were many, I guess, phases to my evolution toward being a director. I think as a young person, I was immediately affected by the power of movies from a very young age. And then certain films that I saw in my, pre-teen years, I would say, like The Graduate, and then a little later, Midnight Cowboy, films that had an extremely strong directorial sort of point of view and how the camera was being used in those films. And editorially, films like Midnight Cowboy are remarkable and made a huge impression on me. And I think I started to think about the lens and thinking about a language of cinema that I wanted to start thinking about more thoroughly. But my college years exposed me to more experimental traditions, more avant-garde traditions. And by the time I finished college, I think I was assuming that my work and the kinds of things that interested me would not necessarily equate with a career as a director, and that it would be more or in narrative film, in mainstream film. That basically, like many certain teachers in college who were more experimental filmmakers and worked in academia and supported their livelihood that way. That seemed absolutely fine for me and more of a viable outcome.
It's quite interesting that you say that you had sort of like the look of a movie, the way that it was edited and the way that it was shot in your teenage years. But was there like a story that really triggered your interest in telling stories as well on the big screen? I mean, a movie, I read or heard something that you said Mary Poppins was something that you really enjoyed, the colors and the way that was done. Was that something that you said, I want to do as well when I
Well, yeah, but that was the very first film I saw. And so it operated at a level that was probably absolutely had to do with the narrative and the story and the sort of maternal presence of this remarkable subject, Mary Poppins. But that's a unique film, I think, still for young people. But I think the first film anyone sees is a remarkable experience and something that might not ever be repeated exactly that way. And the way a child's imagination can replay what they experienced that first time, that's something today it's hard to know what the equivalent is when you can replay movies and watch them on DVD infinitely. But we would see movies for one time and remember them and be able to reenact them, and I would do that. I would play out those scenes and I would draw pictures of Mary Poppins and all that stuff.
The Graduate and Midnight Cowboy are 2 movies that are, quite interesting because they are a little controversial, the themes that they touch upon. Did you have that feeling when you saw them, okay, this is a different kind of movie making because Mary Poppins is a fairy tale and the others are very close to real life? They are reality based.
Yeah.
Is that something that you said, I want to do this kind of movie because it retells stories that happen around me as well and I can do something for society in that way, or is that too far-fetched?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think I was probably 12 when I saw The Graduate. I think the sense of that character, Benjamin, being so alienated from that suburban life was a resonant factor in that film. The way the camera isolated him in the frame, the way you followed Benjamin through his room, and the parents were these crosses in front of the lens that were abstractions, and he was this isolated subject on camera that conveyed everything that you needed to know about the story occurred within one of Mike Nichols' extremely compact shots, you know? That made me start to think about the frame, and I think what it made me think is about the limits, that actually by imposing limits on what you see, it has a stronger impact on the viewer. Your imagination is left to fill in what you're not seeing on the frame. And that sort of great minimalism that was evident in 60s filmmaking made an impact on me. No question, by the time I saw Midnight Cowboy in high school, and it was a coveted moment in my high school where certain students were handpicked to sit on the floor and watch this print of Midnight Cowboy that they had gotten, you know. I think it was a gay teacher who showed it to us. And that was it was one of those life-changing events. I think the film still affects me that way. And so many levels, editorially, the way it's shot, the performances in the film, the subject matter, the moment in time that it focuses on in New York City.
Do you have the feeling, jumping back to the present, that nowadays filmmakers still do the things that you pointed out with The Graduate and Midnight Cowboy, that they tell a story on the screen, but you have to sort of imagine what's happening next to the camera shot? Because nowadays it's so easy to do stuff with CGI, with the big blockbusters. Do you think this is sort of movie making a little bit of the past, but it should come back? I mean, is this still something that you fight for and think this is going to come back in a way? Talking about Carol later, your newest movie.
I do feel like when so many visual mechanisms and technical advancements and CGI and digital processes are at our disposal as directors, it makes you think less about where the camera is and why it's there. And strangely enough, when there's so much being offered and there's such a panoply of technical options available to directors today, instead what you find is this almost lack of consideration about the camera. Most movies today are shot handheld, on digital, where you just keep the film rolling and you let the actor improvise and you move around the room and you make all of your editorial decisions in the editing room later. And sort of why the camera is where it is less of a consideration. And so and that's true for, you know, singular and well-considered films that you see on the art house circuit and, you know, dramatic schlock television, sort of across the board. And I think that can be done with consideration and thought. But far too often, I think it's the go-to sort of recourse. And it's sort of it's a preset mode of how you visualize narrative experience.
By the way, if you have questions while we're talking, just feel free to fire away. Raise your hand, stand up, and we're going to give you a microphone, and then you're ready to ask Todd whatever you want to know about. Okay. Spontaneously. Right here in the second row. Do we have a microphone for this gentleman? Da kommt's. Genau, einmal durchreichen, super.
About Midnight Cowboy, I'm a film critic, and I just wrote a review about a movie made by an American Indian film director set in Oklahoma, about homeless Indians in Tulsa. So my headline was Midnight Indians. So I got a note back for the first time ever from one of the editors I deal with saying, really good review, but we took out all your references to Midnight Cowboy because none of our viewers would know what that is, what that refers to. So, of course, I emailed her back and I said, well, our job as film critics and film historians is to tell people what they might not necessarily know, and they should know about Midnight Cowboy. I'm wondering what you think of that phenomenon of people not, and this is for a literate audience, by the way.
Right.
People supposedly, the younger generation, not even having heard of such a pivotal film as Midnight Cowboy.
Well, of course, it's distressing. To me, it's distressing to people who love film and love film history and see film history as a continuum and a series of reactions to and from various modes of filmmaking and periods of filmmaking, especially when you consider the plethora of information available to young people today. I mean, I remember being a kid and having a fantasy that you could go to a store and it would have all the movies in the world. And you could say, I want to watch that movie. And they would hand it to you over the counter. And to me, it was a fantasy of unrivaled proportions. It was an amazing dream, right? Many, many years later, I remember being in the video store in New York City. You want to rent a movie, and you're kind of hungry, but you're kind of irritable, and you're kind of looking up and down the wall at what you want to watch, and because there's so much available, almost the desire to find something is diminished by the sheer, weight of options available to you. And it does something about desire, I think, when there's no scarcity. And it does something about curiosity. And it's exactly the opposite of what you would think, because you think having access should stoke hunger and make you want to look and make you want to. But I also remember, I grew up in an era where there was the revival cinema. And in Los Angeles, there were many of them, and some of them, the best known, were the New Art Theater and the Fox Venice Theater. And you'd get a printed schedule for a month and a half, and every single night was a different double bill. And somebody else was making all of those choices. There was a curatorial factor. And it's sort of what happens when we go to school, and a teacher gives you a syllabus of movies or books to read. And it helps you to orient your own taste, your own knowledge, your own exposure when you have a guide. And I lived in those theaters. That was the beginning of my cinematic education. And I can't imagine, it's just not the same thing when you have to do it yourself, even when you can, even when we have infinite resources available to us today.
So do you think, coming back to your question, that someone should basically guide the youth to what to see in order to be able to...
Yes, critics.
The critics, good.
Teachers. They're even, on YouTube. There's arbiters of taste. There are little YouTube stars that tell you what to buy and what to... it would be interesting if maybe that extended, and maybe it does, because I'm not fully literate on YouTube, and I only... pay attention to some of it. But it's a resource to me, right? But we maybe need more curators. We maybe need more guides. We maybe need more YouTube representatives to be the specialist on movies and to talk about genres of movies and give, their followers a list of films to check out each week. Who knows? I don't know.
With your working schedule, with the stuff that you need to do you have the time to expand your horizon when it comes to movies? I mean, do you have the time to basically check everything out from the newest series to the newest...
God, no. Oh, my God. I'm so behind. Isn't everybody woefully behind in the massive stuff everyone's supposed to watch and all the, dramatic shows that everyone recommends to you?
But is it important to you? I mean, to be
Some
inspired to basically know
yes,
what's happening?
but not necessarily. I mean, I want to watch a portion of what's new and feel like I'm engaged in the contemporary discourse of what's happening. But just as important, if not more so, is catching up with classics and historical films and great, art cinema that I also am still catching up on, as we all are. And having my partner is a film buff, fanatic, cineast, walking encyclopedia, so he's always showing me shit, that's amazing. And what's great is his preference is for highbrow and lowbrow. So he'll go to the most extreme avant-garde Japanese cinema from 1960 and then the Kardashians. And my weakness is middle brow. So we cover all the brows between the three of us, between the two of us, three of us. The three brows are covered between the two of us. You do the math.
Good. I got it. Question from the gentleman all the way in the back.
Not a question so much as a thank you for describing exactly this kind of cinema. This is a revival house. So
Sweet.
anyone here who's
That's
interested
fantastic.
in film history, come back after the festival, please.
Yes, that is so fantastic. It's rare.
The gentleman right here and then the lady over there. And the, welches Mikrofon geht da hin? Von der Dame? Ja, das geht sehr schnell hier. Nicht die Frage vergessen? Okay.
When you ask actors and actresses, not only from America but also from Europe, whom they want to work with, a lot of them surprisingly say Todd Haynes. And each time I hear that, I ask myself, why? Why would anyone work? No, seriously.
I ask myself the same question.
Obviously, you're doing something right in your work with the actors. So I want to know, what's your secret? How do you work with them, and why do you think they love them? They love you?
Well, you know, this is true for a lot of actors, but not all actors. But a lot of actors want to stretch themselves, challenge themselves, find roles that they may not find in mainstream, bigger budget productions. And that is more often than not what I've been able to offer a lot of extraordinary actors, men and women. And I'm incredibly lucky because it's been a mutual relationship where the participation of some name actors has helped my films get financed, has helped progress and expand their catalog of performances and what we think is possible. You know, one example is my film about the Bob Dylan-inspired film, I'm Not There, which had 6 actors needed to play all those central roles. But there was no way to get a film that sort of experimental in nature made without first Richard Gere saying, I want to take part in this film. And then also saying, yes, I'll do it for that little amount of money. And then all the other actors had to do it for the same amount of money, which made it something we could finance, you know? But it took that extraordinary leap of faith that they all brought to that project to make it possible to begin with. But I think they benefited. Cate Blanchett got to play this extraordinary role, the likes of which she may never be asked to play again. And I think it was scary for her. And that's sort of what all challenging and fruitful experiences are, is scary. And you have to figure out a way of not letting that get in your way and actually let that be part of the incentive for taking that leap of faith. But she did, and the results are you know, pretty impressive.
Question from the
Yeah,
lady.
about Carol. Might as well stay on that topic. I thought that was absolutely fantastic,
Thank
by
you
the
so
way,
much.
just amazing. Could I ask you 2 things? A bunch of questions on Carol, and then one about your relationship between, say, yourself as the director and the cinematographer. Like, how much of it do you let the cinematographer do and you guide? That would be one question. And the other one in regard to Carol would be, how did you come across the story from Phyllis? What propelled you to do it? How long did it take you to do it? And what kind of budget did you sort of have to manage it on?
50 questions put into 2 sentences.
Only a few things.
No, go ahead. Keep the microphone because we need to jump back
I
to
know,
you probably.
right? This is a good... they've all been great questions. Thanks, you guys. First of all, Ed Lachman shot Carol, and I'd worked on 3 prior projects with Ed. I would say in all my films, there's a process that I go through in sort of trying to find the visual language for the film. And most of my films are films I've written or developed myself from the onset. Unlike Carol being the only film that I actually directed based on someone else's script, which was a fantastic experience, and I loved having done it. But in that development process and research process, there's a point where if I can't see it, I am not there yet. I haven't really done my work yet. And so usually that coincides with a fairly ambitious process of culling images, finding images and references, photography, painting, and largely other films that help to specify the look that I'm talking about. Excuse me, and it's I put together an image book for all of the films I do, and many directors do this. But it's a painstaking process. I sometimes get a little nerdy about it and a little preoccupied, but it helps me. It's part of the working out mechanism that I think helps me be as specific and useful to all of the creative departments that come on board. I almost feel like I'm making it first for the DP, that book. It's almost a direct communication of things I can begin to put into words, but ultimately have to put into images, and the juxtaposition of images. So with Far From Heaven, that book reflected largely on the work of Douglas Sirk and melodramas and the 1950s in America, particularly the sort of Eisenhower era, end of the 1950s, unlike Carroll's 50s. In I'm Not There, it was a sort of catalog of cinematic references from the decade of the 1960s, which became a template for each of the stories in the film so that they could be distinguishable, unique in tone and look and style, but also relevant to that very rich and experimental era of filmmaking, mostly European art cinema. But that became a way of, and also the way the images kind of are pieced together helped also talk about, how we would contrast and intercut the stories. But the same thing happened with Carroll, and the references in Carroll were more from a sort of documentary, photojournalistic look at early 1950s New York City, and a lot of the color photography being done at the time. In other words, not filtered through the cinema of that time as much as the actual research and photojournalism and art photography being done by photographers in New York City in color, mostly color photography. And that became sort of the base, largely this amazing photographer who'd passed away very recently and has sort of become discovered, named Saul Leiter, who was an abstract expressionist painter and color photographer and shot through glass and windows and bus windows and cafe windows at different sort of LEITER, fucking amazing color photographer from the period. And a lot of women photographers who were published in Life magazine who are also working in the color medium. And then you asked about...
So it made it easy for your shot list with your DOP.
It did.
Because then you've got it pretty much set out, so you'd be totally relaxed going into a shoot.
Exactly, but then it gives them... really what I find is that what your creative partners want is specificity. Then they feel like there's a solid foundation upon which we're all standing, and they can start to facilitate it and help me find the technical solutions to what I'm trying to achieve. And then we have a really clear and specific point of reference for what we're trying to do.
Awesome.
My next question is sort of aimed at what we've been talking about, at your definition of being a director, and especially talking about Carol, what the gentleman said, that all actresses and actors want to work with you. You have worked with Cate Blanchett. This was the first time for you and Rooney. The importance of chemistry in this movie. The movie sort of is beautiful, but it lives and dies with the chemistry between the two. How would you describe your work as a director, not only with the DOP, but also with the actors? You cannot predict chemistry. How did you go about to find those two? They're brilliant together, but how did you do it? And how did you, it could have gone into a completely different direction.
I don't know that there's any formula for chemistry. As has been said many times before by actors, it's all about casting. And it's about really careful considerations of based on what you've seen of people's work, right? And And yet there's also that element where you're asking an actor to enter into a realm and a role and a character and a setting that they may have never played before. And that was true for Rooney Mara in this role. Now, I'd seen all of these remarkable performances in this fairly young career, but she often played pretty tough characters. The first that comes to mind is the girl with the dragon tattoo, which couldn't be further from the role of Therese in Carol. But that movie Side Effects, Soderbergh's film with her, showed her, it was a series of MacGuffins and deceptions to the viewer that you finally discover later on, but you're watching her under a compromised state, under the influence of medication and depression, fighting depression. And I started to see a glimmer of what this character, who's virtually an unformed subject at the beginning of Carol, and you kind of slowly watch her coming into view, into focus, mostly to herself, let alone to us as viewers, And by the end of the film, she really changes. You watch this transformation quite remarkably, even within just a 4-month span that the film covers. But I had some feeling that she knew exactly what to do with that role. And yet I watch it now and I'm like, how did we know that? That was really something that I have not seen her do before. And she did it. I mean, I spoke to people who'd worked with her and they were just floored by the experience, like what she brings to the preparation process, what she brings to the set. Her, very much like Kate, is prepared, is intelligent, is conscientious, is extremely hardest on herself, but incredibly generous with the people around her, kind to the people around her. So she's a great creative partner on set. But, and she was really she's really on film more than Kate in the film.
But did you run it by Kate? I mean, because I think Kate
we did.
Was
I did talk to. I did talk to Kate. Kate was on first. She was when it came to me. When the project came to me, Kate was attached to it. And I said, "Oh, Kate Blanchett again." Okay. So it was great to talk to Kate about some of the actors in discussion, and there was no question about taking that leap of faith.
Especially with these two actresses, would you say that your job as a director, as we've been talking about, the look and the way that the movie is being shot, that you basically prepare everything and then you just let them loose? I mean, or do you think that your job as a director is to guide them and to tell them exactly what they should do? Because I have the feeling that you like the actors and actresses to be in control, and that's why that they like to work with you, and you just sort of guide them.
The thing that I've learned is that every actor has a different process. Every actor has a different set of needs from the director. And really, the most important job is to be flexible and to try to learn that process and to be a partner in that process and to give them what they need, and sometimes, and to not exceed it when that's all they want, and to be as available for actors that want more information and specificity and detail. With Kate and Rooney, it was comparable how much discussion there is in advance. And that's really where most of it happens, is in advance. And then, a lot of the specific choices about acting and character get channeled into very specific choices about clothes, about hair, about the specificity of the period, about dialect. These are concrete manifestations of how a character exists in the world. And especially when you watch someone like Rooney, who changes through the film. How she dresses, how she looks, what the hair is like through the first part of the film, and how it changes are fundamental, not superfluous and not superficial at all. Those things are essential to how a character gets formed and how a character is sort of anchored.
On the other hand, the message from Carol is a universal message. I mean, it has nothing to do with the period of time that sort of it was based in the novel in. because it's about love. You know, the first time that you unconditionally fall in love with someone and you don't know what to do.
Yes.
So would you say that you could have placed the movie in a different decade? I mean, in the present, and shot it there? And would that have been a completely different movie with the two actresses?
You know, I so agree with your statement, because that, or how you posed the question, because for me, it was reading the novel, which set my mind going, you know, and I loved Phyllis's initial adaptation of the novel. I thought it was beautiful. But that novel is so extraordinary because it documents that you know, process of falling in love that we all have experienced, and almost the pathology of what that experience is like, how much it sets you outside of the world in your own kind of image repertoire of hyper productivity, where you're conjuring up every possible scenario and reading every single gesture for what it might say about how that person feels about you. And so everything is a sign that you are hungry to read and decipher, but you can't. You never know. And every gesture that suggests something ultimately betrays you, right? And that was so beautifully described in the novel, maybe because Patricia Highsmith is a crime writer, primarily. This is the only book that I know of, except I heard from a journalist today that her very last book is set in Zurich, and it's called Little G. Is this correct? Am I saying that? Anyway, Small G. And it's about contemporary gay and lesbian life in the 80s. But I think that's the only exception, and I didn't know this, so every day is a...
That brings me to another topic, objectivity, because you said it, you know, once you're in love, you look at every gesture and you're not objective anymore. You always think that it means something, even though sometimes it doesn't. What about movie making? When you are sort of stuck with a project for such a long time and you work on it, you prepare it, you shoot it, then you go into post-production, how do you try to stay objective to the material? Because once you finished it, it goes out, and the audience is going to look at it in a completely different way. How do you deal with that, and how do you try to basically prepare yourself what a critic could write or what a member of the audience could say?
It's a futile, impossible state, because you're always searching to regain objectivity and a freshness to the experience of watching it, as it is, you know, changing and evolving at times under very minute, you know, adjustments. And you're trying to weigh the impact of one minute adjustment upon the whole experience as best you can. For me, there is no way to underestimate the importance of screenings, starting with that handful of friends and colleagues, but broadening out to people you don't know, you know. I don't do test screenings or call in people from the street, but we do a series of screenings and we get people to write about their experience watching the movie. And it's invaluable. It's essential. It doesn't mean that everything they say is a problem or a concern or are things you implement directly. You're always interpreting what you're hearing. But it often results in changes to your cut and the experience of watching your film. And you often end up giving up or losing your favorite scene or your most cherished moment. You're like, okay, gotta let it go. Because the whole experience is really what matters, you know? And there were some significant changes to the structure of Carol even. I mean, to at least how the final, for people who've seen the movie, that final party scene that Therese goes to played a bigger role in the original script. And we realized it wasn't supporting the time on film that we had allotted to it that came out of the script. And it was a great note. It was a consensus note that we kept getting from people watching the movie. So you have to be tough on it. In a way, you have to kind of be able to hate the thing you love and just be kind of cold-blooded and say, nope, it needs to do this, and you just got to do it.
Is that even harder with a movie script that you've written yourself? I mean, this time you directed someone else's material, as you've been saying it. Is it different?
It's always something else. It's always, at each stage you have to let go. It's different from the way you imagine it to then how you write it on the page. It's different from how you write it on the page to the dailies that you get. It's different from the dailies that you get to that first cut, that horrifying first cut. It's different from that first cut to the second and third and fourth. Every stage is a relinquishing of the investment in, or at least the sort of fetishistic, crush you get on little things that you do. It doesn't mean that the general spirit, idea that motivated it doesn't need to stay intact. I think that's sort of a given, and you're trying to sort of manifest it with every aspect of the process that you can. But it also means surrounding yourself with great people who you trust, to be honest, and to be hard, if not harder on it than you are at times.
We were talking about the gestures of falling in love with someone, and you interpret everything that happens around you. In Carol, I think probably the most important sequences are the gaze. I would call them gaze sequences.
You mean the lesbian scenes?
No, sort of. No, the look.
I know.
The look sequences, but we can talk about the gay sequences as well. Is that difficult to shoot? Because if you look at movies nowadays, the dialogue sort of overruns most of the sequences that you take a look at. And I would imagine that, especially for Kate and for Rooney, that must have been difficult for them as well, because suddenly they're not saying anything, but they have to do everything with a look, with small gestures. How did you prepare them for that, and how important was it for you to capture these moments exactly the way that you captured them?
I don't think it was hard. I don't think it was an obstacle for them. I think it was an invitation for an entire kind of lexicon of communication that comes from the body, and that's really where acting begins. And so those constraints are always helpful. They're never an enemy. To me, they're an invitation. And that begins with financial constraints, which means you have to know what you're seeing in the frame, especially for a period film. You have to know what you're seeing in the frame and what you're not seeing in the frame, because you simply can't afford to dress something you're not seeing in the frame. Doesn't mean there weren't scenes that we shot that are out of the movie, but we didn't know that going in, of course. So I think that level of reduction of sort of signification in language, but having it be imbued in gesture and look and a limited. What's really interesting about these characters is the limitations that they exist under, mostly due to the period in which they live. But even the girdles they wear are limitations that impose a way of moving on them, and that communicate something very specific about the time and place that we might not consider as contemporary subjects, But all of those constraints help and contribute to those creative choices.
Question from the gentleman right there, yeah.
Are there some movies that you'd like to make, but that you can't make right now because of the subject matter, not so much because of the money? And what I'm getting to is there's a poster outside for a Swiss movie, and I don't know how to pronounce it auf Deutsch, but would translate into Mountain Fire.
The mountain what?
Hohenfuhrer? Yeah, I didn't know. And the subject matter of that, it's a famous Swiss movie. Anyhow, it kind of deals with a brother and sister falling in love. So are there some it reminded me of a movie that I saw on Laserdisc from about 1947, and it was they thought this director would be like the next Orson Welles, and they gave him carte blanche, and he made a movie about that same subject matter, and I have it on Laserdisc, and what they did was when the Hollywood saw the movie, they freaked out, and they said, "You've got to change this," and
Right.
he didn't want to, and so what they did, they made him change the ending and made it seem like it was a dream. And when you watch it on Laserdisc, as he originally intended, it's one of the best movies I've ever seen.
What's it called, that film?
I can't remember the name of it. I saw it. I can't remember because it's in the States right now in storage.
Sure.
And shot in beautiful black and white. It's like what Orson Welles would have done. Exactly like if Orson Welles had done a movie like this. And then you can switch on the Laserdisc so it shows this new version, politically correct version, where the whole thing was just a dream.
Right.
So I guess my question to you is, are there some movies that you would like to make that you feel like you still can't? Or are there movies that you know of that have been made but that are still so buried deep, like this movie that I'm describing?
In terms of films that I can't really think of anything that the subject matter in and of itself is an obstacle to getting it made for me. But I'm not necessarily drawn. I don't know that I'm necessarily drawn to the, for lack of a better word, the sort of extremes of human behavior or subject matter that is in and of itself shocking or transgressive. If anything, sometimes I tend to find quote unquote normalcy and the kind of expectations to follow limits and to succumb to limits more interesting than people who break limits and cross them. But that's just my taste, I mean, but I think it speaks to what interests me about melodrama, what interests me about domestic stories, what interests me about stories that often feature female characters at their core, because they're almost by definition non-escapist stories. They're burdened with the limits, the pressures of culture, and that I feel speaks more to all of our experiences than genres sometimes associated more with male characters who experience a kind of limitless crossing of boundaries or exploration of freedoms.
Question from the gentleman right here.
Hello. First of all, I want to say it's cool that you are here.
Thank you.
Great to see you. My name is Laurie Messerli. I'm working as a cinematographer for AZ Media and also as a journalist. My question is about the score of the film. What really impresses me is last year we saw Hans Zimmer did a completely new soundtrack in Interstellar.
Right.
And now in your film Far From Heaven, you collaborated with Elmer Bernstein, and here with Carter Burwell. And Carter Burwell is known for his dark soundtracks in, for example, No Country for Old Men. Mm-hmm. And here it's completely new for me. And how did you decide to work with this artist?
I've worked with Carter. I first worked with Carter on my film Velvet Goldmine from 1998 for just a little bit of incidental music that we needed for a largely song-driven soundtrack. Then I worked with him on my film on Mildred Pierce, that was a multi-part episodic drama that was ultimately produced by HBO, and for which he won his only major award, believe it or not, because Carter's scores, which are for every single Coen Brothers film, and many, many other remarkable films, he's never really put himself on the out into the publicity world of all that crap, to his credit or whatever. And this time he's going to do it. This time he actually is hiring a publicist for Carol, which I'm very proud of, just because I think it's such a beautiful piece of work, and I think he deserves the attention that his whole career justifies. But I would disagree with you in that his scores for the Coen Brothers films there's a lyricism and a melodic component in Carter's scores from the beginning, and it creates a counterpoint to that cold, brilliant, acute way of visualizing those films by that director and producer and writer team. And I love that about them. And they go back. I think they knew each other from school, so they have a very long history. But with Mildred Pierce and with Carol, that lyricism that's, I think, so innate in his work is sort of given. It doesn't have the counterpoint to the same degree, you know. Mildred Pierce has some tough social themes and critiques of class and that plays out across the Depression era, and a really complicated mother-daughter relationship at its core. And Carol is full of a lot of repressed inability to express, as we've been talking about, their emotions. And the music gives voice to things that can't always be stated in words or actions. But I think it's a beautiful piece of work that he did. Thanks for asking.
Question from the lady over there, and then we...
How do you make your movies? I mean, how do you get your ideas? How do you develop the stories? Do you get up in the morning? Say, I have to do a movie about Bob Dylan.
Again, each one has its own evolution, motivation, inspiration. You know, the Bob Dylan film came a little out of Left Wing when I found myself. I listened to Bob Dylan a lot in high school, and then I kind of stopped listening for a while. And then at the end of the 90s, I started to crave Bob Dylan music for some weird reason, like in this sort of symptomatic hunger. And I think I was after some association with that adolescent energy and that kind of fuck all bravado that I associated, and you still hear in his voice and in his assuredness and in his sort of verve as an artist, that propulsive thing, you know. And I think I needed it in my life to get me from one point in my life to another. And I was driving across country from New York City, where I'd lived for 15 years, to Portland, Oregon, to get away from the city. My sister lived in Portland. I was going to go there to write the script for Far From Heaven, and I just wanted a change of scenery and a change of setting. But I couldn't stop playing Bob Dylan, and I went, and they were just reissuing all those bootleg recordings, and I was discovering new stuff from the seminal periods of his life, and I was reading biographies. And so it was almost like my job was Far From Heaven, but my hunger was Dylan, and they were coinciding in some bizarre way, and I didn't realize I was back actually leaving New York for good. And when I landed in Portland, I met all these new people, and I think I was having an early midlife crisis, and Dylan was answering it in advance. And I met all these younger people, and there was a sense of energy there, and it just didn't feel like people were settled. And I don't know, I found something there that I didn't even know I was looking for, maybe. And in the midst of it, I just kept reading the same thing about Dylan in the 60s that described him as this shapeshifter, somebody who, everybody was saying the same thing. Whatever biography you read, the accounts were absolutely identical. It was like, I saw him in, April of '63, and he looked like Woody Guthrie, and he talked like Woody Guthrie, and he acted like Woody Guthrie, and he sang like Woody. And then I saw him in, January of '64, and he was a completely different person who talked different, spoke different, sang different, wrote differently, was inspired by different things. And people kept talking about this radical shape shifting that we, of course, we associate with him plugging in electric or converting to Christianity or these big, cultural things that everybody freaked out about. But it was happening at a residual level throughout that decade. And I just thought, wow, that would be the way to get to the core of who this artist is by really honoring those differences and letting different actors and having each one be a different story with a different style, with a different language. But I thought, there's no way I'm going to get rights. I'd already tried to get rights to the Karen Carpenter music and didn't get them, and the movie got banned. I tried to get rights to David Bowie's music for Velvet Goldmine, no way. And I thought, oh yeah, now I'm going to get rights to Bob Dylan's music. And we just tried. We just talked to the manager, and and he just was like, yeah, that's interesting. That sounds like something Allen Ginsberg once said about Dylan, that he was all these archetypes, American archetypes, a little collection of archetypes. Why don't you just write it out in one page? And don't say anything about voice of a generation or genius. Just talk about your thing. And I did. And I made it as academic sounding and bizarre as it is. Suppositions on a film concerning Dylan. And sent it to Bob, and with some of my films. And really, like a month later, we get a call like, yeah, he'll give you his whole life rights and all his rights to all his songs. And they did. And we had complete freedom through the entire process to also describe him, unglamorously, unfavorably in some of the characters and moments in the movie. And I couldn't believe what was happening, that we were given that kind of that I was given this kind of artistic freedom to really interpret freely and speak freely and experimentally about this amazing artist. So yeah, that's how that one started, at least.
Todd, with your body of work and the experience that you have as a director, are there still, challenges while movie making that you are afraid of? Sort of like the tennis player who loves to play forehand but not backhand, and he's still, in the top 10. And has there ever been a moment on a movie set where everything just went blank for a couple of hours and you thought, why am I doing this? I should do something else?
I almost don't have the time or the space to let the fear take over like that, and it's usually because of it's always because of extremely tight schedules and budgets. And that there's, at a certain level, a sort of workhorse mentality takes over. That said, I always have to plan minutely with everybody who's helping me so that we know exactly what we're doing every day, and it's extremely, planned out. So there's almost no margin for that kind of, I think that's always lurking, that sense of uncertainty, of fear, of this, because most of my films have been truly experiments, things I haven't done before in style, even if it repeats some generic, interests in films about women or suburbia or whatever. But for the most part, they've all been things I haven't really done before or seen exactly like that before. It's weird. I almost recently just realized that it's taken my whole career, not that I made that many movies, but to get to just sort of naturalism, which I explore in both Mildred Pierce and Carol, maybe in different ways, and maybe they're both they're both based on novels. But it's never really been my stylistic approach to telling stories, which is sort of, I think, where most people probably start, you know, in naturalism. But maybe it took all of those, you know, bigger experiments to trust a quieter narrative language, stylistic language.
We're almost coming to an end, but we're not going to let you go because you flew in last night. You're flying back tomorrow morning to the west coast of the U.S. Before you tell us what you're working on now, I mean, what can we expect in the hopefully near future?
The next project is called Wonderstruck, and it's the graphic novel that Brian Selznick created after Hugo, the film that Scorsese made, and it's gorgeous, and it's a film about, and you know, primarily for or intended to appeal to younger people. It's really about 3 12-year-olds, mostly a little girl in 1927, navigating New York City on her own. She runs away from her house. And a little boy in 1977 navigating New York City. They both end up at the Natural History Museum, and they're both deaf. And so it contrasts these two very different moments in the history of the city through the eyes of these young people. And it's so it, like Hugo, it reflects back on silent cinema, history, and young people and their exploration of a city. And again, it was Sandy Powell who worked with Brian on Hugo and fell in love with him, just thinks he's the greatest. And when he wrote, this is the first script he himself adapted because there was another writer for Hugo. And he gave it to me, which is so lovely. And we're trying to get it going in January. We'll see if we get it going in January.
Great. Thank you, Todd.
Thank
we
you.
wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you so
Carol.
much.
Fantastic movie. Thank you so
Thanks,
much, ladies and
guys.
gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
The great Todd Haynes.